My approach to viewing movies, and art in general, has shifted towards a no caveats approach. What I mean by this is that too often people, myself included, feel weird or embarrassed for liking something. That can be for a multitude of reasons, usually stemming from not agreeing with the universal like or dislike of something. You shouldn't feel pressured to mold your tastes around what other people deem as being the best or worst of a given genre. There are classic, essential movies that I think are very deserving of their status, and others that I end up not liking, and that's okay. Categorizing art in this way feels weird to me, like those alignment charts you see on Twitter that decide whether the music you like makes you an incel or not. Not just a genre, but an entire medium of filmmaking that often gets this treatment is animation. The Oscars segregate animation into their own category, and there's a staggering amount of people who only view animation as a medium for children's entertainment. Obviously, that's not the popular opinion, as a lot of anime and American animation cover heavier, more adult subject matter. Exploring dark topics and themes through animation provides the opportunity to express it in a way that almost isn't replicable in live action. Creators can use those preconceived notions that people have towards animation to make the heavy moments that much more visceral. Even with all that in mind, you can't help but be taken slightly aback when you're presented with a character drama about a young veteran returning home, attempting to find his place in the world after the war, but all of the characters are penguins. Shiōase Monogatari, or Penguin's Memory, was released in 1985, directed by Shinji Kimura. Kimura has a very impressive decade-spanning resume, ranging from art direction to designing background art. Notable works include My Neighbor Totoro, Akira, and Angel's Egg, which, spoiler alert, happens to be the subject of my next video, so stay tuned. If the notion of a war drama starring cute penguins wasn't already tantalizing enough, the origins of how it was made are just as interesting. The Japanese beer company Suntory had launched a new series of commercials in 1983 starring what would become known as the Poppy Poo Penguins. The ads are quite dramatic, showcasing moments of joy, sadness, longing, and love. All of the trials and tribulations in the life of not just a penguin, but humans too, are best accompanied with a fresh, cold can of Suntory beer, right? This advertising campaign was extremely successful, with the love that people had for the penguins spawning tons of merch and memorabilia. In order to capitalize on the popularity of the penguins, Suntory, in collaboration with several studios, decided to give the penguins a proper story in the form of a movie. Most of the time, companies creating a movie or show for their mascots feel so focus-tested and cynical, and of course, product placement has become a staple of modern Hollywood. There's no doubt in my mind that Suntory saw this movie as just any other attempt to make money, but it's amazing to me that a movie spawned from the success of a beer advertising campaign would not only be good, but also tell a serious, compelling story. I'll just get it out of the way right now. Yes, I am aware that the penguins look extremely similar to the ones from Club Penguin. I read interviews from Chris Hendricks, one of the game's lead animators, where he stated his inspirations for the design of the penguins, none of which include Penguin's Memory. It's like the most popular aspect of this movie online, so there's no way that I couldn't mention it, so there you go. The somber notes of a harmonica ease us through the opening credits into the midst of warfare. The sound of helicopters, missiles, and gunfire ring through the night sky as we're introduced to our protagonist, Mike. While waiting out the carnage with his fellow soldiers, Tom and Al, we get an early indication of Mike's characterization: quiet, reserved, and a fondness for poetry. The poetry giving him the peace of mind that he needs to get through this situation. Now, the war being fought in the movie is known as the Delta War, but the aesthetics and visuals share an uncanny resemblance to that of the Vietnam War. To the point where, in the following scene, Mike and his fellow soldiers are caught in the crossfire as their own helicopters gun down a crowd of injured civilians. While the sequence of events aren't one-to-one, this scene does share similarities to war crimes committed by the US Tiger Force, as well as the infamous My Lai massacre. Tom is gunned down, but Mike and Al manage to clear up the confusion and grab onto a helicopter to escape. Only Al is not so lucky, as the blast from an enemy missile loosens his grip, causing him to fall to his death. Just about 10 minutes in, and this movie does not fuck around. Mike's return home from the war is met with celebration and excitement from his friends and family, wanting to hear his exciting tales of bravery. Only, according to Mike, there was no heroicism involved, and he was simply just following his orders. The trauma from the events of the movie's opening begin to manifest as no one seems to show much concern for how Mike might have been affected by the conflict. Finally surrounded by his loved ones once again, Mike feels more alone now than he ever did before. Mike's sister is the only one who seems to understand what he's going through, and her presence eases his mind. Despite this, Mike decides to leave it all behind, hopping aboard a train for an unknown destination. The similarities to the real world are present again, as many veterans of the Vietnam War had a difficult time reintegrating into society, feeling unwelcome and not being able to receive proper treatment for the toll the war took on them. Throughout the montage of Mike's hobo journey, I'd like to point out how beautiful this movie is. The only readily available versions are on YouTube in sub 720p, but the strength of the visuals shines through the compression. Country farmhouses, industrial plants, the neon lights of the city, all places that used to feel so familiar are now alien and desolate. Also, this shot is actually incredible. Mike's journey finally lands him in the vibrant, lively Lake City. We, the audience, are welcomed into the city by a musical number from Jill and her students. While her dialogue is performed by Hiromi Suru, this and subsequent songs are performed by legendary Japanese idol Seiko Matsuda. She might already sound familiar not just because she's a famous artist, but also because her song, Sweet Memories, was used in one of the Centauri Penguin ads from 1983.
Don't kiss me, baby. We can live roughy. So don't let more pain. Please don't hurt me again.
Cheerful and uplifting, Jill's song paints the picture of Lake City being a welcoming place for a wayward soul like Mike. Though only speaking briefly for the first time, it's clear that this won't be the last encounter for Mike and Jill. A chance opportunity arises for Mike as the local library is in need of a new librarian. Impressed by his knowledge of poetry, the head librarian decides to hire Mike. The poetry that Mike reads and quotes throughout the movie is written by a Randall James. Upon research, this is just a poet made up for the movie. However, there was a real American poet by the name of James Ryder Randall. He's most famous for writing the former state song of Maryland, Maryland, My Maryland, which also happened to be a battle anthem for the Confederate Army during the Civil War. Can't say there's much of a similarity between the works of Randall James and James Ryder Randall. The quotation of poetry is quite deliberate, as, seeking an end to his travels, the traveler sets out traveling once more. His only luggage is the setting sun, reflects Mike's current life situation. Hopefully, this traveler might have finally found his destination. At a waterside restaurant, we learn more about Jill's backstory as she confides in her older friend, Madame O'Hara. Jill dreams of becoming a professional singer, but fears that she won't be able to pursue her dreams due to her father's desire for her to marry the accomplished and talented doctor, Jack. In the same way that fate had shown favor to Mike, a record producer from Central City happened to arrive at the restaurant before Jill, scouting for new talent. Madame O'Hara had gone ahead and put in a word for Jill, allowing her the opportunity to get an audition. As Mike begins to settle into his new life, he and Jill meet again as she's returning some books to the library. As Mike successfully finds a particular poetry collection she's been looking for, Jill notes that there's never been such a knowledgeable and considerate person here before. Though bashful, Mike takes Jill up on an offer to tour him around the city. From here, we see the penguins strolling the streets, getting to know each other. Mike learns of Jill's dreams of becoming a singer, and Jill learns of Mike's time in the war. Not only this, but Mike expresses a desire of his to one day travel to two locations, Mount Jeffrey and Sunset Beach. If it wasn't already clear, this movie is supposed to take place in a semi-real version of the United States. Although he'd actually gotten to the crossroads of these places before, he turned back as he feared going to either would result in his journey's end. Whether he knows it or not, Mike has been living the life of the traveler from the Randall James poem, not allowing himself to ever reach the end of his journey. As their relationship grows, the desire from Jill's father for her to marry Jack becomes more insistent. Unbeknownst to Jill or her father, Jack is already romantically involved with another doctor from the hospital he works at. Despite neither of them showing any real romantic interest in one another, Jack does begin to stalk Jill as she spends more and more time with Mike. And with the warmth of the sunset sky, accompanied by the diegetic tune of Tom's harmonica, Mike and Jill share their first kiss in the park where they met. The relationship is now serious. As we've roughly reached the halfway point in the story, there is something that I'd like to note. While not being a criticism, this movie does have the world-building element of there simultaneously being anthropomorphic and normal animals in the same world. It's not as weird like in Disney with the Goofy and Pluto situation, but Mike does end up raising an injured bird back to health and keeping it as a pet. I mean, no world building will ever be as strange as the Cars universe, with the implications of Car Hitler and the attempted assassination of Car Pope John Paul II. Back to the story. Things are now only looking up for Jill as she meets with the producer Bob Adams and sets off for her audition in Central City. Giving it her all, the audition is a massive success and Jill is offered a contract. To celebrate, Madame O'Hara hosts a performance for Jill at her restaurant. In what I think is an extremely clever decision, Jill performs an extended version of Sweet Memories from the original Centauri Penguin ad. The scene plays out almost identical to how it did in the commercial, with Mike staring longingly at Jill through the moody club lighting. While the lore of the original ads gave the impression that Mike and Jill did have something between them in the past, in the film, Mike's gaze is no longer that of sweet memories, but of the sweet here and now. The lonely Centauri beer is replaced with a loving rose and champagne. I don't think Centauri makes champagne, but in my headcanon they do in this universe, and that's what they're drinking. The festivities are quickly derailed as Jack appears, demanding Jill come with him. Mike interjects, ultimately punching Jack. Showing some admiration towards Mike's tenacity, Jack reveals the plan for his and Jill's marriage, which was unknown to Mike up until now. Questioning whether a drifter like Mike could even make Jill happy, Mike storms off from the party, Jill following suit. From here, there's a stretch of time where Mike becomes distant, ignoring Jill's attempts to explain herself. Just as he'd finally found a place to call his own, thoughts of leaving and nightmares of the war begin to creep back to him. Mike is able to ease his mind through the process of rehabilitating the previously mentioned bird, Chico. Upon finally being able to fly again, Mike expects Chico to return to his life in the skies, but is surprised when he willingly comes back to him. Mike encounters Jack again, indicating that he hasn't been with Jill at all since the incident at the restaurant. It comes as a surprise to Mike that Jack isn't angry with him, but instead wants to have a heart-to-heart. Jack reveals that he also served in the Delta War as a physician, and deals with the same kind of post-traumatic stress disorder as Mike. Jack has been observing his and Jill's relationship, and the fiasco at the bar was a test to see if Mike truly loves Jill. Jack already loves someone else, so he wants to make sure that Mike has what it takes to love her properly and make her happy. The traveler motif comes up again, as Mike is told that his love for Jill is something that he can't run away from. You know, Jack is lucky that his plan worked out as well as it did, because when you really think about it, this had a way more likely chance of being a total disaster. Like, Mike could have just outright left and never returned, making things way worse for everybody. Everyone would just be way more miserable. A bad ending for everyone. Realizing what he needs to do, Mike finally welcomes Jill into his apartment again, where she gives him one of her professionally made posters. Setting off on a drive through the country, Jill asks Mike to come with her to Central City, as the record deal requires her to move there. Not only this, but she can possibly find her mother, who moved to Central City when she was little and never returned. Mike denies her request, stating he wishes to remain in Lake City and live a quiet life. Tom's harmonica clutched in his hand, Mike asks Jill why she thinks he left his hometown. For Mike, the life that he's made for himself in Lake City is what has allowed him to move past his hellish experience in the war, where he can finally live a normal life again, and he doesn't want to give that up. Simultaneously, he doesn't want Jill to give up on what she wants just because of him, urging her to forget about him and pursue her dream. This frustrates and confuses Jill as she makes it abundantly clear that she wants Mike in her life, no matter what. Seeking guidance, Jill visits Madame O'Hara, who's equally saddened by the status of Mike and Jill's relationship. Relating to Jill through a uniquely similar experience, Madame O'Hara tells the story of how she too dreamed of being a professional singer, setting off for Central City. Her doctor husband had his own dream of starting up a hospital in his hometown. Upon asking him to come with her, his response was, "Go by yourself," to which she did. However, her music career never panned out, and the record was a flop. In a shocking 11th hour twist, Jill pieces together the puzzle and realizes that Madame O'Hara is in fact her long-lost mother. Madame O'Hara convinces Jill to chase after Mike, not wanting her to repeat the same mistake that she did. Now, this is definitely my least favorite part of the movie. The plot twist was set up earlier during a conversation between O'Hara and Jill's father where they referenced their past love. So, not much issue there, But my problem lies mostly with the message being given. It comes across way more like Jill's mom is projecting her own insecurities onto Jill, making her fear that her career will end up like hers, even though it hasn't even started yet. There's no way to know if Jill's record is going to be successful or not, so why should she just give up because of one person's anecdotal experience? This is something that mattered to her way before she ever met Mike, who she realistically hasn't even known for that long. I understand that this is an older movie, and this conservative point of view was more prevalent back then, but I just really don't like the way it's portrayed here. And it would seem that Bob Adams agrees with me because he too is upset with Jill's decision after overhearing their conversation. Another issue I have here is that Bob Adams kind of just becomes the bad guy of the movie, even though he wasn't set up in that way previously. He's obviously an overzealous, enterprising businessman with lavish dreams, but the movie could have used more moments to build up his changing character. Record labels and music executives in real life are evil scumbags who constantly exploit and screw over their talent, and we just didn't really see any of that here until the very end. Bob and his cronies pull up to Mike's apartment, trying to persuade him to skip town. Doing so would make Jill give up on Mike and have her come back to fulfill her contract. Jill manages to intervene, professing her true love for Mike and wanting to stay in Lake City with him, while still pursuing music non-professionally. Bob and his goons are not receptive to this and resort to physical means of persuasion. What ensues is the most powerful moment in the film. After being subdued by the brute, the smaller goon kills Chico. The murder of his innocent companion is what puts Mike over the edge, triggering all of the memories of pain and death from the war all at once. Mike is sent into a blind rage, brutally beating Bob and his goons. Jill is able to snap him out of it, but it's far too late as the police arrive and Mike is arrested. Even though he's found guilty for assault, Mike ends up receiving a suspended sentence due to the circumstances of the situation. Despite this, Mike decides to leave Lake City and sets off for Mount Jeffrey or Sunset Beach, hoping this time to finally put an end to his journey as per the advice of the head librarian. In a letter that he leaves to Jill, Mike professes that her love opened his heart and restored what had been taken from him. However, he had taken it for granted and lost to the monster called war. He only wishes for her to be happy, but feels unfit to share that happiness with her. Before leaving, Jack meets up with Mike, reminding him that he'll always be welcome in Lake City should he decide to return. Seeking an end to his travels, the traveler sets out traveling once more, returning to the fateful crossroads. Only this time, this is a decision that the traveler doesn't have to make alone, as Jill is pulled up right behind him. Asking her which way she'd like to go, Mike hops in the car, with one final kiss accompanied by the vocal grace of Seiko Matsuda to close out the film. Where they end up going is ultimately unknown, but matters not as long as they're together. Despite being conceived from an advertising campaign and having the online moniker of the Club Penguin anime, what we just experienced was a legitimate and convincing war drama. Topics like PTSD are covered in a nuanced and gentle way that respects the people who suffer from it and condemns the circumstances that cause the suffering. Wars are fought by regular, everyday people who are made to endure the most terrifying and traumatic events that a person can experience. You're trained and prepared to fight in the war, but not prepared for what to do when the fighting is over. It's a very sad reality that so many veterans end up in dire circumstances whenever they return home. But this movie is a reminder that there is hope. It can feel like the people around you don't understand what you're going through, and unfortunately that can sometimes be true. But the worst thing you can do is isolate yourself and shut out the world around you. Like Jack said, running from love is impossible. Despite what you might think, you are loved. There are people in your life that care about you and want to share in wherever your journey might take you. It's not easy, but you have to start somewhere. And that message was conveyed to the audience by a bunch of bulbous, animated penguins. The juxtaposition of their design with the seriousness of the events depicted in the film heightens how we react to these events. It's heartbreaking to see someone lost in the world, and uplifting to see that person fall in love. And the impact of these scenarios is increased when it's a cute, innocent-looking character having to endure very real situations. It's like our primal instincts kick in, wanting to protect and nurture. And it's for this reason why I find it so effective, and why I recommend it with no caveats. It definitely has its problems, but it's just as deserving of attention as any other film within its genre. And so, those are my thoughts on Penguin's Memory. This is a movie that I think is very deserving of everyone's time, and, you know, I'd like to just make more people aware of it so they check it out. I like to do that with any kind of piece of art that I think is interesting. This video took a lot longer than I had anticipated to come out. During the conceptualization phase, I was trying to figure out how I wanted to approach it, and I ended up just opting for a more straightforward kind of like analysis and summary of the plot to back up the, you know, thesis I was making. It didn't help that my computer was fighting with me during the editing process, and that really slowed things down. My computer did not like the movie, it would seem, but I really enjoyed it, and I hope all of you do too. Thank you all so much for your kind words and comments and likes on the Lost Phantom Blood movie video. I am so happy that one did well. I'm hoping this one does well too, and hopefully the next one and all subsequent videos from here on out do well. Please leave any and all thoughts and comments that you have down below. I'd love to read them. And above all else, thank you for watching.